Hello my friends, it's Cree Rama, and thank you for stopping by today to Create with Cree. So in my last video, I did these guys. I was playing around with embossing glaze, and I loved this so much that I want to play around with this idea more and make some more grungy papers. So also in the last video, which I will link in the video description, I did this with texture paste and then embossing glaze on top. So it has that raised part and the wax on top once the embossing glaze melts, and it just looks really cool. And I love using this stuff. I just tear these papers up and use a little piece to layer on my projects for Halloween. So I did those, and then I also put some on these girls from Art House Whimsy. I love doing this to my focal points. This one we used 2 different colors of glaze, and the other ones we just used 1 color. You can see the shine. And this one we did the moon. This girl, this was bundled sage, I think is what we used. So you get the idea, and I just wanted to play around a bit more with some embossed papers. So I've got these papers. I also have packages of, they're just like this. There's 20 different embossing folders that I used. I've got packages in my shop if anybody is interested. I love embossed papers and playing around with them. I also like using sprays and just inks on them, and I have a couple of videos playing around with that. I went crazy for a little while. To see the other video, like I said, the link's in the video description, and I go through everything slower and really kind of explain things as I go. So that's kind of a good first video to start with. So let's play and see what we come up with. So let's start with this one that looks like a piece of wood. And I'm just going to use a little bit of ink. And you guys know I love using my little mini inks to do stuff like this. So this is the brushed corduroy. And then I like to put layers of different color down. So after I put this down, I'll grab something else. So let's try the black soot and just layer up those colors a little bit. Now this ink dries really fast, so I'm just going to use my heat tool and just kind of hit it with my heat gun just to dry it a bit, because I want to use the regular embossing ink, which is clear. So I'm just going to rub this on, and then we can choose our color of embossing glaze to go on top of this. And I'm going to use some of the fired brick. So you see when this melts that it's translucent, so we have those darker ink colors showing up in the background of this. And I like this. So let's just push it a little bit more and add a little bit. This is my spray bottle. It just has a little bit of water in, and I added some black soot because that's what I was kind of using to go in the crevices of my embossed papers. So that's just what I'm doing here, and I'm using my brush to kind of push it down in there. So that'll make some of those areas dark. And then remember, it will just lift off of the areas that have the embossing glaze because it's covered basically in plastic. So we'll lift that off, and then here is our final result. And I like this. Give this a quick dry. So let's try this. It looks like a basket weave pattern. So I'm going to try the old paper. And this is not really doing that much, so I'm going to try peeled paint. That shows up a little nicer. And then let's spray it with some water to get that oxide to react, but I don't like this with the black soot in it, so let's use some regular water. And that's not really doing much. I'm not very happy with it, so let's just start adding some color. Just experiment with color. So I'm going to speed this part up. I have my two papers. I've got the brick and then I have the basket weave, and I'm just going to kind of smush my papers down into some ink on my messy pad, and we're just going to add some layers of color here. And then after I do this, because I am adding water to the ink and my paper is wet, so I'm going to dry this. And then let's try just embossing ink, which is clear. And let's try just going over it with some embossing glaze and see what happens. So this one is pumice stone. So let's go ahead and heat set this. Okay, this did not do very much at all, so I am just going to add more ink with a mini ink pad. And then I'm going to try a darker color. So let's try I'm going to try the Hickory Smoke next. And we'll see what this one is like. So let's heat set this one. And this is much better already, I can see. Okay, so I have a couple of tips since I started doing this and playing around a bit. Number one is you want layers of color before you put the embossing glaze on top. I like these really layered with colors. This is still my favorite, and I really like this one too. Okay, so anyway, you want to put layers of color down, but what I realized is you don't want to use the sprays, although the sprays are great to add color. Problem is when it's wet, it warps. And then when you go to rub, you know, your dauber and things on, it doesn't get all of the areas the way that it would if it was dry and freshly embossed. So what I have learned is I like layers of color using my ink pads, and I like the minis because they're so small. So you can just do, you know, little areas and make sure you don't get too deep down into the cracks and the grooves, because you don't really want to do that. So that is one thing that I discovered. So now that I got some color on this, like here you can see where that's where it warped, and I didn't get it with my distress ink, so it doesn't have any embossing powder on it. So what I want to do now, since I was using the black soot, I put a couple drops in here with water, but I will tell you it just really works better if you use just the ink. So I think I'm going to try just putting less, like maybe like a drop in different places. And then we'll put some of this spray. So again, you can see how the areas, it's just sitting on top of the embossing glaze. So we just want to work it into those grooves where there isn't any powder. And I wouldn't even do the whole thing. I like it just parts of it. So let me take this one and smush it on top here to pick some of that up. Okay. Now I'm just gonna blot this to get some of that color up. So there we go. I like this has, see, I can't even remember the colors that I used, but it's got like a purple tint to it. I think that is from the aged mahogany, the way all these colors came together. But I'm just loving this technique. Okay, let's try our brick one. Let's put something else down here. So instead of using the embossing ink, which is clear, I am going to use a mini. I'm going to use Vintage Photo. The other thing that's nice about using regular ink is that you can see where it's going. So you'll see where the embossing glaze is going to stick to. And I rub both ways in little circles, switch directions. And let's go ahead and just put some black soot in areas. Okay, and then we're going to quickly put on some glaze, and let's do aged mahogany. Let's try that. Okay, now we'll heat set this. Okay, so this happens sometimes when I went to heat set it, most of the powder blew off. So I've got a little bit on there, if you can see where it is shiny. So I'm gonna go ahead now, and I'm gonna use my dauber. And what color should we use here? I'm going to use the Tattered Rose because it's a pretty light color, so it's just going to kind of blend this and make the colors pop. So we're going to try that and see what happens. Okay, let's heat set this. It looks like most of this is covered with the embossing glaze. Now, if I wanted to, well, this brush is dirty. I could just take a brush and kind of like, you know, to get some spaces out. Okay, let's heat set this. So look how fabulous this looks. And again, and this is the one that we kept rubbing all of the color onto. So that's why you see all of that, all those different colors blending together here. That's looking fabulous. Now the only thing about this is I think the powder went down into the cracks, so I'm not sure if we could get a lot more layering going on here, like in the creases. I'd like to put a little bit there. And instead of the black soot, let me see. I'm gonna try Gathered Twigs. It's not quite as dark. And we'll see what happens. I'm gonna take my water and just spray here so we can move that around. So here it's sinking in. Down here it's sinking in some parts. So this is actually good. I'm happy with it just like this. So I'm going to go ahead and blot this. Okay, and there we go. We could even keep going with this if you wanted to add different colors in the cracks here, because I can see there are some spaces, so you could layer it with other colors. I mean, you could really go crazy with this. I'm going to do this one. And let's try some different colors here. And let's go ahead and heat set this one. This is what we have so far. And I'm just going to play around with more color here. Now for this one, I'm pushing kind of harder, pressing down. Because I want those deeper parts, not just the raised parts. Okay, I'm not even going to do anything else to this because I love this. So next I'm going to try, this is the honeycomb paper, and I think this is going to be a really good one to do because it has so many different levels to the embossed part. So I think the 3D embossing folders are definitely, I think, better for this, unless you have one that really does a good image when you emboss it. So I'm just starting off with some layers of ink here. And then make sure that's dry, and we'll go ahead and put some embossing ink on. Another thing that I am realizing is that the embossing ink, so you'll see when I put the powder on here, you'll see it sticks to a lot more of the paper. The embossing ink is sticky, so it helps it stick better. If I just use my little mini ink pads, I will get some of the powder to stick, but it's not really the same. But still works, just serves, a different purpose here. So I'm going to go right over top of some of this with hickory smoke. So I'm just going to pick some areas to kind of go over, and we'll see what this looks like. So this is looking kind of interesting. I like the different colors here. It almost has a blue color or something at the top, which is neat. You never know what you're going to get when you are experimenting with this, so that's kind of the fun part. So now that all that is dry, I'm going to go and try to get some ink down in those cracks if there are any areas that I didn't really get any embossing powder. So I'm just using my brush to spread this around a little bit, and then same thing as before. If I have a lot of ink, I'll blot it up with another paper that I want to use, and then just use a paper towel or something and get up the rest of the ink from my paper. So this is another good one. I'm really happy with the way that this one turned out. I love this embossing folder. And next up, I want to use something different. Let's do the bundled sage, and I'm just going to go over this entire thing. So I'm using the embossing ink, and then we're going to do the bundled sage. And I'm using this, it's just a skewer that I happen to have by my desk for doing my boho beads. And I'm just kind of going in those lines because I want to get the embossing powder out of those areas. And I can already tell this isn't going to, because it's not covering a lot of my paper. So I'm just going to add a little bit more here. And we'll do a different color. So I'm going to do the crushed olive. And now the pumice stone ink pad and chipped sapphire I have not used before. It's very dark, but it's such a pretty color, this blue. And I'm definitely liking this. So now we can put some ink down in there. I'm using frayed burlap, and these are just my re-inkers, guys. So I'm just putting a little bit down, spray it with water to get more movement, and then use my brush to push it down into the cracks there. And then we'll do the same thing to blot some of that up or smush it. Then I'll smush another paper down in to pick up some of that leftover color. Okay, so we'll wipe this off, and this one is done. I like this. So now I'm going to take that one that looks like the stone, and we've got lots of different inks on there that I use to smush it down into stuff. So going crazy with color here. I'm going to try this purple color, the Seedless Preserves. And then again, I'm just going to use my brush and get rid of some of that powder so that I can get rid of the powder in between the stones. And we'll see what happens here. So this is looking kind of cool. I like this. Now I'm going to try something different. Let's cut this in half, and I'm going to use the mica sprays and just spray over top of this. Okay, so these were from the Halloween kit I just happened to have by my desk, so that's why I grabbed these. And it's nice because you just spray it, and then when you wipe it, it will wipe off of the parts that got the embossing glaze on top of. Okay, so now I'm going to try something a little bit different. You can't really see this paper, but it's a floral one. So I'm just coloring with my embossing marker the flowers, and we're going to emboss those flowers first. So I'm using abandoned coral, and then this one is the rusty hinge. Okay, so this is what it looks like after it's embossed. Nothing really big here. Then I'm going to just rub over those with some ink pads. And we'll try the peeled paint. So this is cool, but definitely want more color here, but it's starting to look good. So let's put the tattered rose over the whole thing. And I'm already liking this a lot better. So now we've got those colors, and I can see the areas where there is not any embossing glaze, so we can push the ink down into those areas. And this is much better. I'm liking this. And last one here, guys, this is another one that I've just been layering up a little bit of color, and going to use the vintage photo. And then I wanted to play around with some background colors here. So let's go over the design just to make sure that that pops. And we'll put some embossing glaze on. And then I wanted to use a spray to make the background just something different, a different color. So we've got the hickory smoke, so the design will kind of pop and be darker. So this is what we have. And now I'm going to use the cracked pistachio to get that background. So I'm just going to spray it and then wipe it off, because you can see it's sitting on top of that embossing glaze. And so I can just wipe it off at the top. And I like this. So let's take a look at what we did here. This is the first ones that I sprayed after I embossed. I used some of the mica sprays. Just wanted to see what it did, so I cut this in half to test it out. And this is the one that got the whole thing going, so I had to make more. Now this is the one that we made today. So for this one, I started out with some embossing glaze over top of the whole thing, and then just slowly added the color on top, mixed the colors together. This one I used inks to color it. Then we've got the honeycomb. And this one, this was ink, embossing glaze, and then I put the spray underneath to get that background. And this one, I love the colors of this. And the tree we did today. This one with the flower. Now this, I just wanted to test this out. This is a embossing powder that has glitter in it. It's called Tinsel. It's also a Ranger product. And there's this one. This has some really cool colors, and I hope you can see it well in the video. This textured paper. So this background I sprayed, dried it really well, and then embossing glaze on top. And then this is the last one that we just did. So thank you for joining me for some more messy fun here. And my hands aren't even that bad again. I'm so shocked. Stay tuned for some more crafty adventures. Thanks for watching.